Hello learners. So in this module we are going to learn about the implementation of sampling plans, because every quantitative analytical procedure will utilize a sample, and once the sample is collected, how the sample is going to be subjected for analysis. And before the start of the analysis, sample has to be pre-treated in order to remove all those endogenous substances if they are present along with the analyte in the sample. So what are the pre-treatment steps, or generally we can say that what are the implementation plans we will follow while handling solids, liquids or gaseous samples. So let us see one by one. In the previous module we have discussed about the sampling, importance of sampling, objective of sampling, and what is sampling plan. And we have also discussed about the design criteria for sampling plan. In today's session, let us detailed understanding about the sampling plan we will have. So you know the definition of sampling plan. Sampling plan is nothing but it is a plan to obtain the sample which is a representative one for analysis. So whatever the sample you are going to use, so it may be a solid sample or a liquid sample or a gaseous sample, we could not use that sample for analysis straight away, but we have to convert the sample into the laboratory ready sample. That means to say that the sample which should be a representative one for analysis. So while doing and while processing the sample, what are the implementation steps which are very essential for a chemist to understand? So the implementation steps for solids, solutions or liquids and gaseous samples, let us discuss one by one. So we have to understand what are the principal steps in implementing the sampling plan. So I can say that there are three important steps in order to implement any sample. It may be solid or liquid or gaseous sample. The first step is, once we identify the target population, we have to remove the sample from the target population. So we have to remove the sample physically from the target population. Once the sample removal is done, that sample must be subjected for treatment and analysis. In order to remove the sample physically from the target population, we will use a device or we will use an object, and this object or device must be ensured to be inert and clean. Otherwise, if the device or object is not clean enough, is not inert enough, the contaminants which are present in the device or object which are going to introduce their contaminant as sources into the sample, therefore we will be ending up with erroneous results. And once the sample is removed from the target population, that sample is called as primary sample. And this primary sample may be a grass sample, and this grass sample might have obtained by grabbing a single sample from the target population or pooling many grab samples into a composite sample. And this grab or composite sample is going to be used for analysis after further treatment, whether it will be quantitative analysis in order to determine the trace species present, or in order to determine the quantity of any macro species if they are present in the sample. So the ultimate aim while handling the sample after removal from the target population physically, we have to reduce the sample size before its subjection for analysis. Therefore, these are all the things we have to ensure in the first step, that is, in physically removing the sample from the target population. Once the sample is removed in the first step physically from the target population, in the implementation of the sampling plan, preservation of the sample is also very important, because the sample will be composed by several endogenous substances along with the analyte. Of course, we may be interested with the analyte in order to quantify the analyte, but in the presence of many other species which are present in the sample, once the sample is exposed to the atmosphere, or once the sample is made to interact with the atmospheric components after the collection, there may be chances of getting converting the sample into another state. Therefore, this has to be avoided. The physical or chemical changes of the sample or the physical or chemical changes of the analyte state which are present in the sample has to be avoided by proper preservation of the sample. So preservation is very important in order to avoid either physical or chemical changes of the analyte. And the third important step is, once the sample is preserved, we have to prepare the sample for analysis. So preparation of the sample for analysis means, if it is a solid, we have to convert the sample into solution form, because most of the analytical techniques what we follow, they require the sample in the solution form, or most of the analytical techniques what we follow require sample in the gaseous state. So we must have an analytical procedure in order to convert a sample, in order to prepare a sample into analyzable form. So therefore, sampling plan can be implemented by following these three simple steps. Number one is physically removing the sample from the target population. We have to remove a grab sample, or we have to collect the composite sample, and we have to reduce the size of the sample before its subjection for analysis. Once the sample is collected successfully from the target population, we have to preserve the sample by following appropriate steps and by taking appropriate precautionary measurements. And the preserved sample has to be subjected for preparation of the sample for analysis. That may be converting the solid sample into solution form, or the liquid sample which may be contained with many unwanted species, and all those unwanted species have to be removed by performing the extraction step or something else, and that sample has to be ready for the analysis. Therefore, these are the three important steps of implementing the sampling plan. Let me take one by one. What are the implementation steps in order to handle liquid samples, solid samples, and gaseous samples? First, let me take the solutions, or the samples which are present in liquid state. Normally, the samples which will be present in liquid states from the source of chemical solvents, because since we are all chemists, we will be using number of chemical solvents. It may be for synthetic purpose or analytical purpose, whatever it is. Those commercial solvents are liquids in nature. While handling such liquids for analysis, how to implement the sampling plan? And even beverages such as milk and fruit juices, we will subject them for analysis. Say for example, milk, what is the amount of fat present in milk, what is the amount of calcium present in milk, what is the amount of protein present in milk. We will be in a position to determine, we will be in a position to analyze the milk. Therefore, milk is a liquid sample. And even fruit juices, fruit juice analysis become very common nowadays, because are there any additives present in the fruit juice, are there any colorants present in the fruit juice, are there any intolerable species present in the fruit juice. So we will take up such fruit juices for analysis. So these are also liquid samples. Even the water samples from the lakes, streams, seawater, and rainwater, all these are known as natural waters. The pollution level of the water made the analysis of water sample as a very essential step. Therefore, we have to understand the extent of pollutants which are present in the water. Then we can decide after analysis that whether the water is suitable for potable purpose or not, whether the water is suitable for the agricultural purpose or not, whether the water is suitable for the industrial purpose or not. So we will decide by the analysis of water. And even body fluids such as blood and urine, even sweat samples are also liquid in nature, and we have to collect that blood or urine or sweat samples for analysis. Therefore, how to implement the sampling plan for this. And even many pharmaceutical medications or therapeutic medications what we use in our daily life, they are also in pure liquid state or in suspension state. And when we use them, when we use pure liquids or suspensions from the pharmaceutical sources, how to implement the sampling plan for the preparation of sample for analysis. So these are the types of solvents we will handle in our day-to-day life in analytical chemistry laboratory. So first thing is sample collection. So once the target population is identified, sample has to be collected whichever the target population we have identified. Say for example, if you have to collect the water sample from the river, how to collect the water sample from the river, what are the steps you have to take, and if you wanted to collect the blood sample or urine sample from a patient, what are the steps you have to follow. Or if you wanted to subject the analysis of a suspension which is belonging to pharmaceutical origin, how to subject the sample for collection and treatment. So if the liquid sample whatever you are going to collect is a homogeneous solution, then there will be no any complexity involved in collecting the sample. So either we can siphon the liquid sample and we can fill it into a vial, or we can fill it into a sample reservoir and we can store it before the analysis. Then we can use it for analysis. If the solution is having some undissolved particles, you can keep the sample aside for a particular interval of time, so that all those undissolved particles and which are having higher mass, they will be settled at the bottom, and pure liquid you can obtain from decantation process. So decanting is more than enough. Even we can also collect the samples by using a pipette or syringe, provided the liquid sample is homogeneous in nature and the liquid sample is not having any suspended matter or undissolved matter or any sparingly soluble species. So we will use either siphoning process or decanting process, or even we can pipette the sample by using a pipette. It may be a quantitative pipette or a calibrated pipette, or even we can obtain the sample by sucking the sample into a syringe, and the volume of the syringe will be variable. So that is dependent upon the volume of the sample what we require in order to complete the analysis. Some samples will be non-homogeneous. As I told you, some suspensions which are obtained from the medical stores, or which are being synthesized in a pharmaceutical industry, and if they have to be sampled, they have to be subjected for analysis. They are non-homogeneous in nature. So what we have to do, that first we have to shake them manually in order to convert that suspension, means any suspended matter, if it is present in the sample, they have to be distributed uniformly throughout the solution. Then after manual shaking, that can be obtained as a sample. And even after manual shaking is over, those samples can be collected with a pipette or a syringe, and ultimately they can be stored in a bottle. Therefore, we have to face a challenge here while collecting the sample. It may be homogeneous in nature or heterogeneous in nature. We need a method. What should be the method in order to collect the sample for analysis? Whether we have to siphon, whether we have to decant, or whether we have to use pipette or syringe, or shall we have to shake manually the sample before collection, or shall we have to store it in a plastic bottle or a polyethylene bottle or a glass bottle, whatever it is. So we need a stipulated method in order to collect the sample. It may be a grass sample. Grass sample means it may be a grab sample or a composite sample. So we need an analytical method for collecting the sample. Let me take as an example how to sample the waters or waste waters. Because the composition of the water is not uniform. The composition is influenced by the flow rate and the depth. If you go to one river which is flowing across a particular place, the composition of water which you collect in one place will not be same as the composition of water which you collect in other place. And even it is not only dependent on the atmosphere but also on the flow rate. If the water flow rate is more, even many solid matters can also join along with the water flow. And even the depth, the components which are present in the upper surface of the water will not be same as the components which are present in the lower surface of the water or at the deep surface of the water. Therefore, the chemical composition will not be uniform, will not be identical. Say for example, if you go to any river which is having a shallow flow of water in less than 5 meter, any lake you go to, any lake where a flow of water with a shallow stream, the shallow has less than 5 meter deep. How to collect the sample? Here we will collect a grab sample very conveniently by using a bottle which has to be submerged into the water flow, and once the bottle is immersed into the water flow, the cap has to be removed. Once the water is filled into the container, the cap has to be closed and the bottle has to be obtained out. Then that bottle can be carried into the laboratory. So this is the procedure to collect the sample from a lake which has a shallow flow of water with less than 5 meter deep. If you go to any slow moving streams and rivers and lakes which are having depth more than 5 meter, and this can be seen in estuaries and oceans. Here, the grab samples are preferred to collect near the surface of the water. You need not go to any depth place. You go to the surface of the water, and a single grab sample or many grab samples are required to be collected. If you go to further greater depths, the water sample will be collected in a weighted bottle because the mass of the bottle should be high, should be more, because the bottle should be immersed into the water after submerging. So you will follow the procedure described in this step in order to collect the water sample at the lakes or rivers or estuaries which are having greater depths. So in order to collect the water sample from greater depths, lakes or rivers or estuaries, a weighted bottle will be used and it will be submerged into the water stream, and the cap is opened. Once the water is filled into the can, once the water is filled into the bottle, then it will be obtained up. So this is how we will collect the water sample from a river or lake or estuaries or sea. If you have to collect water sample from the wells or bore wells, you know the chemical composition of borewell water will be different because the wells will be having casing pipes. The wells will be having casing pipes, and these casing pipes will be acting as a source in order to generate some redox potential, and this redox potential will be varying the composition of the water sample. And not only these casing pipes, and also the adjacent matrix which are present in the water, and these adjacent matrix are maybe from the surrounding groundwater. They might have combined with the borewell water from which you are going to collect. So the contaminants might have been introduced while drilling the borewell. While drilling the borewell, tremendous amount of the pressure will be induced, and the highest amount of the energy will be applied in order to drill a borewell. While doing so, contaminants from the surrounding place might have been combined with the water source. Therefore, water pollutants may be present there. So these are the two important sources for the variation in the chemical composition of the borewell water. Number one is contaminants introduced when drilling the borewell, or the differences in the groundwater's redox potential when exposed to atmospheric oxygen. Water exposure to the atmospheric oxygen is very important. Groundwater samples are not exposed to the atmospheric oxygen for longer time because they are present in the ground. So when you bring them to the upper side of the ground, they are definitely going to be exposed to the atmospheric oxygen. Therefore, atmospheric oxygen may oxidize certain species which are present in water sample. Therefore, the composition may undergo two changes. So if you have to collect borewell water or water from municipal water supply, how to follow the procedure? You have to purge the can, you have to purge the water by pumping out certain volume of water equivalent to several well casing volumes. Means you have to flush the water for certain interval of time. Say for example, if you have to collect the water sample from a borewell, you have to keep water to flow out at least 10 to 15 liters. Once 15 liters of water is wasted, then you have to collect the midstream. That midstream water has to be stored in the suitable container. Otherwise, you have to flush the water. You have to keep obtaining the water from the borewell until the water's temperature or pH or specific conductance must become constant. Because at the beginning, when you bring out water sample from the borewell, the temperature, pH and specific conductance will be different when you compare the values with the water sample which is obtained after flushing around 15 to 20 liters of water in the initial stage. Sometimes it will be very essential to obtain the samples by collecting water samples at definite intervals for at least 24 hours. Because here the variation in the composition of the water sample is expected. Say for example, municipal water supply is needed to be analyzed. You may have to collect the water sample in 24 hours. Means, suppose today morning at 10 o'clock you might have collected the water sample. You may also have to collect the water sample at 1 o'clock and even at 4 o'clock, then even at 10 o'clock. Because The variation in the composition with respect to temperature, with respect to atmospheric influence has to be studied. In such cases, 24 hours graph sample has to be collected and the analysis will be done one after the other. Once the water sample is collected, the preservation is very important. How to preserve it? Is it true to preserve the sample in a bucket? Is it okay once the collected water sample is filled in a copper container or a aluminum container or a plastic container, whatever it is? No. The answer is no. You should have a procedure in order to preserve the water sample in an appropriate manner. So normally the collected water samples are stored in either glass or plastic containers, and even the containers can be made from Chemax or Pyrex bond borosilicate glasses. Either glass or plastic or Chemax or Pyrex branded borosilicate glass containers can be used. There are some specific requirements. Say for example, uh, the containers made by polymers such as polyethylene, polypropylene, polycarbonate, polyvinyl chloride and Teflon. Teflon means polytetrafluoroethylene. These are plastic containers. These plastic containers are lightweight, they are durable, and their durability and lightweight excluding the Teflon containers. And excluding the Teflon containers, all those plastic containers are inexpensive. Therefore, we will prefer plastic containers over glass containers. Glass containers are costly and they weigh more and the likelihood of breakage, they undergo breakage very easily. And one important advantage of using plastic container over glass containers that glass is made by silicates, and silicate, when it is interacted with alkali solutions, sodium or potassium of the alkali solution will be in place of hydrogen of the silicate. Therefore, we may lose the analyte if our intention is to determine what is the amount of alkali present in the water sample. In such cases, we do not use glass containers. So, we will prefer plastic containers. So, sample containers made by plastic or glass, they are used equally. But when we are intended to collect the water sample for analyzing alkali salts or alkali species or alkaline species, we do not prefer glass containers, but we will prefer plastic containers. And we also know that any liquid sample or any water sample you have collected, its composition keep on varying. Why? Because as a result of chemical or biological or physical processes in the container in which the sample is preserved, the composition will also be varying. Therefore, once the sample is collected, we have to preserve it intact. The composition should be uniform. The composition should not undergo to any changes. So, in order to do that, in order to preserve the sample, we may have to follow certain preservation steps. So, what are the preservation steps? Whatever the temperature or pH you have collected during the collection of the water sample, the same pH or the temperature you have to maintain. So, controlling the solution's pH and temperature is very important. And we have to limit the exposure of the sample to the light or to the atmosphere, because when the collected water sample is interacted to the light or atmosphere, certain species may prone to undergo decomposition to the light. A certain species may undergo to interaction with the atmospheric components. Therefore, their originality, their actual composition will be subjected to variation. Therefore, in order to avoid this, we need to add certain chemical preservatives, or sometimes the analytes they themselves as preservatives, provided the water sample is stored at a particular temperature and the temperature is set in such a way that all those components which are present in the sample should not undergo any transformation. So once the preservation is done, the collected samples must be safely stored and the stored sample will be analyzed as and when required. Of course, once the sample preservation is done, once the sample storage is done, we cannot assume that yes, a sample has been stored properly and let us complete the analysis after 2 months or 3 months or 4 months or 1 year. No, it is not the case. So for each and every component there will be a lifetime. Once the sample is collected, there will be a stipulated interval of time before which you have to complete the analysis. So There are some maximum holding times for preservation of the sample and in order to complete the analysis of preserved sample. So you must not ignore that. So even after appropriate preservation of the sample, we can complete the analysis as and when required. That should not be the case. This table I have presented some preservatives to be added, or what are the preservative actions we have to follow in order to store the sample. Particularly analysis of the water sample, we will be collecting the water sample and we have to preserve them. Say for example, if we are intended to determine the concentration of ammonia in a water, in a waste water, how to preserve it? Once the sample is collected in a plastic container, we have to cool the sample to 4 degrees Celsius and we have to add sulfuric acid to adjust the pH to less than 2. When you add sulfuric acid, ammonia present in the water sample will be converted to ammonium sulfate and that will be intact at least for 28 days. So you can hold this sample for maximum of 28 days. Between these 28 days, you have to complete the analysis. If the aim is to analyze the chloride, no preservation is required because chloride will be present as long as water or the sample you have kept in the laboratory. But you have to complete the analysis within 28 days because chloride is in the reduced state. If the water sample is exposed to the atmospheric oxygen is sufficient to oxidize this chloride to chlorine. Therefore, within 28 days, you have to complete the analysis. If the intention is to determine the concentration of chromium 6 or mercury, even all other metals, so these are the preservative steps you have to follow. Say, for chromium 6 analysis, you have to cool the sample to 4 degrees Celsius and you have to complete the analysis in 24 hours. And if the metal present is mercury and you are intended to determine the mercury concentration, you have to add nitric acid in order to reduce the pH to 2. Or if all other metals you are intended to determine, nitric acid must be added to adjust the pH to 2. And if mercury, you have to complete the analysis within 28 days. And all other metals other than chromium 6 and mercury, you can complete the analysis in 6 months. The nitrate analysis has to be done for the collected water sample. No preservation is required, but you have to complete the analysis in 48 hours. Here also, nitrate can be converted to nitrite and nitrite can be converted to amine. So reduction reaction is possible when the atmospheric components are interacted with the sample. And even similarly, say for example, organochlorine pesticides, if you are intended to determine the water sample, you have to use a preservative of mercury chloride. 1 ml of 10 milligram per ml mercury chloride you have to add, or some typical extracting solvent you may have to add in order to stabilize the pesticides in the sample. So if you have performed any extraction, 7 days without extraction, you can has a holding time. You can have a holding time, and 40 days with extraction, because after the extraction, the organic layer has obtained a pesticide, and this pesticide will be maintained in an intact level. So that will be stable at least for 40 days. So 7 days without extraction and 40 days with extraction for the maximum holding time of the sample. If you wanted to determine the pH, you have to measure the pH of the water sample, you have to measure the pH of any liquid sample immediately. So no preservative is added here. So these are some examples I have mentioned. Even other than this, you can follow what are the preservative steps you have to take and what are the preservatives you have to add to the water sample, and that is specific to the parameter what you are going to perform the analysis. And how to do the analysis? Once the sample is collected and it is stored in a proper container and it is preserved properly, the preserved sample must be subjected for analysis. So most of the analytical techniques will require the sample to be present in the liquid state. Here you are handling the liquid samples. Liquid samples are in the solution state already. Therefore, some liquid samples are not needed to be subjected to convert them into solutions because they are already in the liquid state. So whatever the samples you have collected, they can be analyzed individually to get the information about the analyte. It may be concentration or change in concentration, whatever it is. Particularly the water samples which are collected from lakes or rivers or estuaries or sea, whatever it is, if we are intended to determine the composition of the water or change in the concentration of the analyte at water sample collected from the different depths, so individual analysis we will do. You will analyze the water sample which is collected above the surface. You may analyze the water sample which is collected below the surface, and you may analyze the water sample which has been collected more than 5 meter shallow flow of the water sample. So individual samples may be analyzed if we are intended to obtain the analyte information at different depths, or even all those individual samples can be pooled together to form a composite sample if we are not intended to study the change in analyte concentration at different depths. So a graph sample may be analyzed, or many graph samples may be pooled to form a composite sample, and we can subject it for analysis. So this is how we will subject the analysis of liquid samples. Let us move on to the sampling plan implementation for gaseous samples. All those gaseous samples which can be subjected for analysis if you are intended. If your intention is to subject all those gaseous samples, you can obtain gaseous samples as such, and you can collect, you can preserve, and you can analyze. So for example, automobile exhaust gases, the aim is to determine what is the amount of carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, oxides of nitrogen, oxides of sulfur, are there any other pollutants present in automobile exhaust. If you are intended to determine, automobile exhaust samples has to be collected because this exhaust will be in gaseous state. And even the gaseous samples are needed to be collected from emissions from industrial smokestacks, because these are the principal pollutant sources of atmosphere. Atmospheric air is polluted to the maximum extent by means of these two components, automobile exhaust and industry smokestacks, industrial discharges. Even water sample is also polluted to the maximum extent due to industrial activities. So emissions from industrial smokestacks will contribute more for the quality of air what we are having. And even some general common special atmospheric gases which are present in the atmosphere have to be subjected for analysis. And even some compressed gases, and some gases will be compressed in compressor bags or cylinders for various purposes. We may have to sample them, we may have to analyze them in order to quantify or in order to determine what are the other components present in such compressed gases. And even some gaseous samples which are solid aerosol particulates are also needed to be collected for analysis. So how to implement the sampling plan for collecting all these type of gaseous samples and for preservation of them and for analysis of them. Sample collection. Sample collection is very easy while collecting the gaseous samples. The collectors will be simply a stainless steel canister or a Tedlar or Teflon bag. So we will use these canisters, stainless steel canisters or Teflon bags, into which a portion of the gas which has to be subjected for analysis will be filled. Very easy. And how to fill this gas? We may use a pump. We may use a pump, or we may suck the gas which is present in the atmosphere into the stainless steel canister or a Tedlar bag or a Teflon bag, or we can use the pump. By applying the pressure, we can make the gas to move into this canister or a Tedlar or Teflon bag. So here the important advantage is we have the advantage of collecting a more representative sample from the atmosphere. If the gaseous sample is needed to be collected, we will be collecting a specific representative sample. No need to follow any sampling minimization steps, or to obtain a representative sample we need not to convert any bulk sample into small sample. So straight away we will be collecting a representative sample. But what are the disadvantages? The disadvantages are many, and one of the more important disadvantages is the tendency for some gases to adsorb to the container's walls. If you use this stainless steel container, again stainless steel container is made by silica. Silica is nothing but selenol groups will be present in silica, and these selenol groups will be involved in the adsorption process. Therefore, some gases, if they are polar in nature, these polar species will be having the tendency to adsorb over the container's walls. In such cases, we may lose these gaseous components from the analysis. So This will be a source of determinate error. So we may lose these gases and we will not be in a position to determine what are these gases, in which amount they have been adsorbed. So we have to collect the sample with a keen procedure, with the objective for not to losing any such gaseous components. If the analytes which are present in very low quantities, so and we are intended to determine them with utmost accuracy and precision, and the presence of reactive gases such as ozone, nitrogen oxides, if they are present in the atmosphere, even they may also combine with the sample what you have collected, and as a result the change in sample's chemical composition will be possible. And of course this will be varied with time because they react with the container. The atmospheric components or the gaseous species may react with the container, they may react with the gaseous components such as ozone or nitrogen oxides. The chemical composition of the analyte may be varied. If their amount is lower in concentration, we will lose them, so accurate and precise determination will not be possible. So therefore, in order to avoid this, when we use stainless steel canister, these disadvantages can be overcome by following cryogenic cooling process. Cryogenic cooling process means it is simply lowering the temperature from higher temperature to lower temperature. The gaseous component which are present in the atmosphere can be converted into liquid samples. So you can collect the sample. You can collect the sample by cryogenic cooling process. Cryogenic cooling process means you can decrease the temperature of the atmosphere while collecting the sample. This decreasing the temperature during the collection of the sample will lead to convert all those gaseous samples to liquid state. So the collection of these liquid samples and the maintenance of these liquid samples in the container will become very easy now. So this is nothing but cryogenic cooling. So cryogenic cooling is nothing but it is a process by decreasing the temperature of converting the gaseous analyte to liquid. So we can use stainless steel canisters. By converting the gaseous analytes to liquid analytes, we can avoid this unwanted transformation of these species. So therefore this cryogenic cooling is going to be very important. So due to the difficulty of storing the gases, most gas samples are collected using either a trap containing a solid sorbent, especially for volatile or semi-volatiles, or by filtering process. And this filtering process will be for non-volatiles. So during the storage of the gases, most gas samples cannot be moving into the container. So we will be in a position to trap them. So how to trap them? If we use a solid sorbent, solid sorbent will also be involved in collecting the sample. So how to use this solid sorbent? Solid sorbent is used in such a way that all those volatile or semi-volatiles, if they are polar, sorbent will also be polar. The adsorption or interaction of this volatile or semi-volatile species will be occurred over the surface of the solid sorbent. And if these non-volatiles, they can be trapped over the surface of the solid sorbent, or they may be removed by filtration process. This filtration is done by adapting or by fusing a filter near to the cap of this stainless steel canister, so that all those particulates which are present in the atmosphere will be filtered and they are collected. So normally volatile or semi-volatile species will be trapped over the surface of the solid sorbent, and the non-volatiles can be obtained by filtration process. So this is how we can collect the sample which are gaseous in nature. And the normally used sorbents are for inorganic species, maybe silica gel or alumina or magnesium aluminum silicate, and even normal molecular sieves. These are used as sorbents. And even some organic polymers and carbon sorbents can also be used. Carbon sorbents such as graphite or charcoal, etc. So inorganic sorbents are silica gel, alumina, magnesium aluminum silicate and molecular sieves. And organic polymers, polymethacrylate we can use, and carbon sorbents such as charcoal even we can use as sorbents, and they are used for trapping polar as well as non-polar species which are present in the atmospheric component. Once the gaseous sample is collected, the preservation and analysis are the next steps. Since the chemical composition of a gaseous sample is usually stable when it is collected using a solid sorbent, because the component which is present in the gaseous sample has been made to adsorb over the sorbent, or it has been collected by filtration process, or it has been collected by cryogenic cooling. So there will be no question of, there will be no suspicion of change in composition chemically. So they will be present intact. So we can use all those samples straight away for analysis. Suppose when we use solid sorbents, all those sorbed analytes can be removed by thermal desorption process. What is thermal desorption process? If polar analytes have been sorbed over the sorbent, you can reverse the polarity of the sorbent by treating with some chemical treatments or by changing the temperature. Here, chemical treatment we cannot do. If you do the chemical treatment, all those components which are present in the sample undergo to chemical changes. But if you vary the temperature, this adsorption or sorption process is also dependent on the temperature. If you increase the temperature, the sorption capacity of the sorbent will also be changed. Therefore, if you change the temperature, sorbed analytes will be desorbed, means they will be removed, they will be detained from the sorbent. So all those detained species can be collected in a suitable solvent in which the solute have been dissolved, and the next step is going to be analysis. You can subject it for analysis. Okay, if the sorbent is selective for only a single analyte, suppose assume a gaseous species is having a non-polar carbon dioxide, gaseous sample what you have collected is containing carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is a non-polar one because of its linearity and zero dipole moment. And if you have used a non-polar sorbent, the carbon dioxide will be adsorbing over the surface of the non-polar sorbent, and this non-polar sorbent is selective only for carbon dioxide. So you can weigh the sorbent before the collection of the sample. You note it down. Once the sample is collected, you note the change in weight. So the difference in weight between the sorbent after the sample collection and before sample collection will give you the mass of the analyte. So analyte concentration can be directly determined. If the sorbent is selective, a specific sorbent is used for individual analyte, the increase in sorbent's mass can be used to determine the analyte's concentration. Therefore, this is going to be always advantageous not only to preserve the sample but also analytical purpose. Let us move on to handling of solids. So how to implement the sampling plan for solids? Solid samples are obtained in regular intervals. Even solid samples are to be converted into liquids before they are subjected for analysis. So what are the instances we will come across with solid samples? Let us see one by one. The solid samples which are having large particulates such as ores we will be handling, because analysis of ore is an important task in any laboratory. And even the solid samples which are having small particulates such as soils and sediments, we may have to analyze them. And even tablets, pellets, capsules which are used in pharmaceutical industries and which are sold. So quality control laboratories will be handling these tablets, pellets and capsules. So how to handle them in order to implement the sampling plan. And even animal feeds which are solid in nature. Some sheet materials may be metals or polymers, and sheet materials may be rolled or a thin sheets made by polymers or metals. How to handle them, how to implement the sampling plan for converting them into analyzable form. And the biological specimens are obtained by utilizing the tissue samples. All these Not only these category of solid samples, but also many others I have left out. So you may have to analyze the ore sample, you may have to analyze the soil and sediment samples, you may have to analyze a tablet or pellet or capsules, you have to analyze pits, metal sheets of metals or bricks or large objects of metals or polymers, and the biological specimens have to be subjected for analysis from a tissue sample. While handling all these solid samples, how to implement the sampling plan, it is very important to understand. The primary step is to collect the sample. Usually solids are going to be heterogeneous. Therefore, we have to take utmost care to collect the sample. If they are to be representative of the target population, we have to be very serious. We cannot ignore even single component. So, the heterogeneity of the solids will make us to become complex, because our aim is to quantify the analyte which is present in the sample. The amount of the analyte present in the soil which is collected in the east side will be different from the amount of the analyte present in the soil which is collected from the west side. Therefore, if the heterogeneity is not going to be a very simple factor, it is going to be considered as a serious one, then we have to collect the sample very carefully. So, as I told you in the previous slide, solids will be coming in variety of forms. So different sampling steps we have to follow. So tablets, you may have to follow different sampling step. Animal feeds or ores, you have to subject them for different sampling plans. And even biological specimens from a tissue sample, you have to subject it for different sampling plan. Therefore, each and every sampling plan for solids will be varying. So how to collect the sample? Let me take an example. If I am aiming to collect a sediment from the bottom of the stream or river or lake or estuary or ocean or a sea, whatever it is, my aim is to collect a sediment. So sediments will be present at the bottom of the river, bottom of the lake or bottom of the estuaries or ocean. So how to obtain the sample? So while collecting the sample, I have to make sure that the identity of the analyte which is present in the sample should not be lost. Composition should not be lost, composition should be same, heterogeneity should not be disturbed, homogeneity should not be disturbed, whatever it is, whatever the assumption which are required, we have to make it. And we must be very keen to collect the sample in an appropriate manner. So, in order to collect these sediment samples from the bottom of the river or lake or etc., more commonly we will use bottom grab samplers. And as an alternative tool, as an alternative device, even we can use cylindrical corer to collect the sample. So, these bottom grab samplers will be having a pair of jaws. You will release this bottom grab sampler with a pair of jaws to the place of sediment. So, until it reaches the sediment, the pair of jaws will be in open state. Once it reaches the sediment, it will close itself. So, cooping up of the sediment will be obtained, and this sediment will be put upward, will be drawn upward by means of a crane, and that sediment will be subjected for analysis. But while doing so, the tendency to lose finer grain sediment particles as water flows out of the sampler can be seen, because this bottom grab sampler will be coming up, water flow will be there. The velocity of the water flow we must bother. So due to the flowing water, due to the flow of water, the least grain sediments might have lost from the bottom grab sampler. So all those components which are present in the sediment have not been collected. This will be the disadvantage. And even the loss of spatial information, say you have collected the sample upward, the atmosphere which is present at the bottom of the sea will be different from the atmosphere which is present at the space from where you have obtained the sample and the place to where you have got the sample. So both laterally and with the depth, due to mixing of the sample with the water, the spatial information will be lost, because the sediment will be coming upward laterally. So mixing action will be possible there. Due to this mixing action, the spatial information will be lost. These are the disadvantages while using these bottom graph samplers, especially while sampling the sea waters or river waters or lake waters or estuaries waters or ocean waters. So this is a schematic representation or a diagrammatic representation of a bottom graph sampler. So this will be tied to a crane, and by means of a train this will be released to the bottom of the sea. Say you can see here sea bottom, and this is the sedimentary layer which is present. From here exactly you have to collect the sample. So assume here a person is using this particular instrument, this particular device to collect the sediment sample from the sea. So by means of a crane he will release this bottom graph sampler with a pair of jaws to the sediment layer. Once this reaches the sediment layer, these two jaws will be closed and they will coop up the sediment sample in between these two jaws. And once the cooping up of the sediment is done, this can be drawn upward and that can be obtained for collecting the sample which has been cooped up by these jaws. And that's what this bottom graph sampler will be working. And this is a schematic representation of the cylindrical corer what we will use in order to collect the sediments from the sea. So this is a cylindrical corer and this will be released to the bottom of the sea, and it will go to the high deepest part of the sea, and it will go to the sediment layer, and we can hit this to the sediment layer in order to collect the sample. Here you can see the sample of sediment has been collected 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and here cylindrical corers may be having one component or two component or three component with respect to compartments. So even you can use these cylindrical corer which are having only one cylinder, two cylinder or three cylinder, whatever it is. Usually we will be using corers with one cylinder, and this will be released to the sediment layer in order to collect the sediments. And say for example, in order to collect the sediments you will use either bottom graph sampler or cylindrical corers. Suppose our intention is to collect the soil sample and other solid samples. What are the samples we will use? Soil samples are usually collected by means of scoops or shovels, or even you can use soil puncher, and this soil puncher will be assisted by the auger. Auger is used to drill a hole to the desired depth. Suppose soil has to be collected from 5 meter depth. A auger will be used to drill the ground up to 5 meter. Then soil has to be collected from the 5th meter. For that purpose we will use soil puncher. And even large particulate solids such as coals and ores are collected by means of shovel or by means of rifflings. Shovel, you know, that is a simple object and that can be introduced to the a pool of coal or ore. So we can collect required quantity of coal or ore sample in a shovel. I will show you in the next slide what is the shape of the shovel or riffling or scoop. Riffle is a trough containing an even number of compartments with adjacent compartments emptying on opposite sides of the riffle. If one compartment is filled, another compartment will become empty. So once the sample collection is over, we can pull up the riffle up, so we can assume whether the sample is collected or not by weight. So these objects such as shovel or rifflings are used to collect the samples which are having large particulate solids. Smaller particulate materials such as powders can be collected by means of a sample thief. Sample thief is very simple to define. It will be consisting of two tubes that are nestled together, and these tubes will be used to allow the material to be contained in that simultaneously, and this can be used to collect the sample from several locations. So this slide is showing how the scoop will be, and this can be released to the pool of the sample, and here exactly the sample is going to be collected. This is a shovel, and this shovel can also be used to clean the grains in your house. So by principle of separation based on the masses, the grains are cleaned by using shovels. So this is the portion that can be merged to the pool of the sample. It may be ore or any sample which is having large particulate matter, and the sample will be collected here. And this is a riffle. This is having two compartments. One compartment will be filled by emptying other compartment simultaneously, and this is a sample thief. Even the merchants of food grains will be using this sample thief to remove the grains from the packet. If a sealed packet is available in your house, say paddy packet, and a merchant will come and he will use this sample thief, he will merge this sample thief, he will penetrate this sample thief into the packet, and he will collect the paddy sample. So this is how the sample thieves are used. And how to sample the metal? Metal may be present in a sheet form or in a wire form or in bars or bricks form. So how to sample them? How to collect the sample from a sheet of metal or a wire of metal or bar or bricks of metal? If the metal is present in the sheet form, metal puncher will be used in order to collect several random samples. So you have to use a metal puncher. You have to punch the sheet and you have to collect all those random samples. If it is metal wire, this wire will be cut into small pieces, and all those small pieces will be pulled together, and all those small pieces will be having appropriate length, and they are used as composite samples. Metal bars are bricks, and these are sampled by sawing through a metal randomly, and this sawdust can be collected just like sawing a wood. After sawing a wood, the powder of wood will be obtained, and likewise even sawing bars of bricks of metals will be giving you the sawdust of metal. Or even drilling through the metal and collecting the shavings is also done while collecting the sample of metal, either by using an instrument to saw the metal surface of a bar or brick, or by using a drilling object such as auger. If some surface coatings have to be analyzed, these surface coatings will be analyzed in situ. How do we do that? The surface coating will be made to interact with the appropriate solvent, because this coating material is soluble in this appropriate solvent, and the solution after dissolution of this surface coating will be subjected for analysis. That's what it is called as in situ. So this is how we will sample the metals. And even sampling of biological tissues are also very important. What we do, we will remove the entire organ from any sample origin. We have to remove the entire organ. Then the homogenized organ is required before smaller portions are collected for analysis. Entire organ has to be removed and it has to be homogenized after pulling several graph samples. Or alternatively, several small portions of tissue may be combined to form a composite sample. You can obtain several portions of a tissue sample, and all those tissue samples can be combined together in order to get a composite sample. All these composite samples may be homogenized, then they can be subjected for analysis. So you can get an entire organ, you can homogenize it, or you can cut the tissue into smaller portions and you can obtain a composite sample, and the homogeneous composite sample can be subjected for analysis, especially while sampling of biological tissues. And how to preserve these solid samples? It is very important, because many solid samples are subject to changes with respect to their chemical composition. Why? Because due to the loss of volatile materials, biodegradation and chemical reactivity. Chemical reactivity in the sense of redox reactions. Because the samples are solid in nature, they are surrounded by many atmospheric components. Atmospheric components are having many substances. They may be oxidative or reductive. So chemical reactivity will be always possible. So preservation is very important. If there are volatile species are present, these volatile species we may lose if we have not preserved the sample properly. Therefore, the chemical composition of the sample subject to be undergoing variation if we have not preserved the sample properly. Therefore, whatever the sample you have collected, you have to store it under appropriate temperatures. Temperatures are set in such a way that there should not be any biodegradation or there should not be any loss of volatile material. In such a temperature, you have to preserve the sample. Say for example, a material scientist has fractured the surface of an object in order to collect the metal or dust of metal, and thus that fractured surface may lead to phase separation, and it may impose several problems. So sample composition may undergo to changes. So sample preservation is very important. As a result, say for example, if some volatile material has been lost, this will minimize the quantitative aspect of the sample, right? Therefore, in order to avoid this, in order to avoid the loss of volatile material, say for example, this can be minimized by ensuring the collection of the sample so that it has to be filled to the container without leaving a headspace where gases can collect. Means over the surface of the sample up to which you have collected the sample in the container, you should not leave any empty space. If empty space is present, other gases can be collected. These other gases can remove all these volatile materials. So you have to tightly collect the sample in a container completely so that you can avoid the loss of volatile material. And say for example, even some samples collected from materials that have not been exposed to atmospheric oxygen, they are definitely susceptible to undergo oxidation reactions, because before the collection of the sample they have not been exposed to the oxygen. Oxygen is an oxidant, oxidizing agent. Once it is collected and it is exposed to the atmosphere, definitely atmospheric oxygen will oxidize that particular analyte which is present in the sample. Say for example, the contact of air with anaerobic sediments will lead to anaerobic oxidation. Definitely, if there is any species present in the sediment, if it is made to contact with the air, and that may undergo to oxidation, anaerobic process may be taken place. So you have to avoid this. How to avoid this? This will be avoided by proper preservation of the sample after its collection. So whatever the solid sample you have collected, you have to preserve it properly. Otherwise, the sample quality, the composition of the sample, or the original property of the analyte which is present in the sample may lead to changes. Then once the sample preservation, collection and preservation is done, sample preparation is very important for solids, because as I told earlier, analytical techniques will be utilizing sample to be present in the solution form. So before we convert the sample which is present in the solid form into solution form, we have to convert that sample into representative sample. Suppose in the analysis of a fuel sample for combustion power, you might have collected 10 kg of the fuel sample. It may be coal, or 10 liters of kerosene sample, or 10 liters of any oil, a mixture of hydrocarbon, whatever it is, or even some 10 kg of meat sample, or 10 kg of protein powder you might have collected. You cannot subject the whole quantity of the sample what you have collected for analysis. So you have to reduce the sample size. Sample size reduction is very important before you go to the analysis, and this is done with the object to convert the large bulk sample into laboratory sample. Representative sample you have to obtain. So once the laboratory sample is obtained, the obtained solid sample has to be brought to solution form. If needed, in order to convert these solids to solution form, we may follow digestion or decomposition steps, and then finally we can convert them into solution state. Therefore, we have to convert the sample whatever we have collected into laboratory sample, means sample size reduction, and the laboratory sample has to be subjected for digestion, decomposition, then we have to subject it for preparation of the solution. How to do this sample size reduction? This is very essential. If you take any solid sample which will be having large particulates and small particulates, we have to separate all those large particulates from small particulates initially. How do we do this? We will do by sieving process. Sieving is a process in which all particles are reduced to a uniform size. All those small particulates are separated from large particulates based on the size. Sieving will be having a provision in order to allow all those particles with respect to diameter of the individual hole of a sieve, the particles will be allowed to pass through. So All those particles which are having the same size will be allowed and other biggest particles will be disallowed. Next, all those larger particles, now you have divided the larger particles and the smaller particles. Next, you subject the larger particles which are not passing through the sieve to convert them into smaller particles. You cannot ignore those larger particles because you need a homogeneous solid sample. So how to convert these larger particles into smaller particles? You have to ensure the homogeneity. So how to do this? You take the larger particles and you subject them for crushing in order to reduce the particle size. Again you sieve it. So this process has to be continued until all those larger particles must be allowed through the sieve. Now you have a uniform size sample or homogeneous sample. Suppose 10 kg or 100 kgs of the sample you might have obtained. This 10 kg of the sample is not necessary to subject for analysis, out of which maybe 1 gram or 0.1 gram may be sufficient. So how to obtain this? This 0.1 gram or 1 gram of the sample is called as laboratory sample. So this homogeneous sample is called as primary sample. Primary sample means whatever you have collected from the target population, that is called as primary sample. And the secondary sample you have to obtain, and this secondary sample has to be converted into laboratory sample. So this secondary sample is obtained by a riffle. Riffle is an object of sampler, object for sampling solids. Or even you can subject these large samples for the process of coning and quartering. So this step is having the steps, namely coning, flattening, and converting into 4 quarters, discarding opposite quarters, and introducing 2 opposite quarters which are present diagonally for further processing of coning and quartering until the laboratory sample is obtained. So this is a very important step in converting large sample size to small sample size. So first you have to separate large particulates from the small particulates by sieving. Then large particulates must be crushed in order to convert them into small particulates, so that the size of the small particulates must be in such a way that they have to pass through the sieve. Now you have got a homogeneous sample, and this homogeneous primary sample has to be converted into secondary sample by means of a riffle or by subjecting to coning and quartering. I will show you what is coning and quartering here. So this has 4 pictures. This is the first step, and this is the second step, third step, and fourth step. This is going to be the last step. In the first step of sample size reduction, you will pull the homogeneous sample into a shape of a cone. This is in the shape of a cone. And by means of a suitable object, you convert that into a flat surface. This cone sample, you convert that into a flatted sample. And you cut that flatted sample into 2 equal halves. So here the flatted sample has been cut into 2 equal halves. Then you cut these 2 equal halves into 4 equal quarters. So this is into halves, here into quarters. 4 equal quarters you have obtained. You ignore these 2 opposite quarters which are diagonal in nature. So in the next step, in the last step, 2 opposite quarters have been omitted and other 2 opposite quarters have been subjected for next step, that is coning again. So you take, cone it, flatten it, cut that into 2 equal halves, quarter it, 2 opposite quarters you discard, and remaining 2 opposite quarters again is subjected for coning, flattening, quartering again. So this process will be continuing until a laboratory or representative sample is obtained. We know what is the amount of the representative sample or laboratory sample. Until we get that much amount of the solid sample, we have to subject the sample for this particular process. So these are the steps involved in sample size reduction, that is coning, flattening, quartering, and sample size reduction by ignoring 2 opposite quarters and again subjecting remaining 2 quarters for coning, flattening, and quartering. Next step is, once the 2 quarters have been subjected, for obtaining the laboratory sample, we have to convert that solid sample into solution form. If there is no any problem in dissolving the solid sample or the obtained laboratory sample, there will be no problem. If the solid sample, whatever you have collected, showing dissolution in any suitable solvent, it may be organic or non-organic, whatever it is, organic solvent or aqueous solvent, whatever it is. So even with gentle swirling or warming up of the mixture of the solid sample and the solvent may also be allowed. Either you can use water or any other solvent. So there will be no problem. If the taken sample is not soluble in solvents such as water or any other solvent, then how to subject that for converting the solid into solution? Normally we will go for digestion. You take ore sample, you will subject the ore sample for digestion. What do you do in the digestion step? Sample will be taken in a beaker that will be treated with acid or a base in an open container, and you will heat by using hot plate as a source of heat energy. So here all those volatile matter, if they are present, will be lost and the oxidation process will be done. Oxidation process will be done. If we are intended to collect all these volatile matter and to subject them for analysis, then this digestion step will not be easier one. So we have to think twice. If our objective is to calculate or to determine what is the amount of volatile matter present in the sample. So if the sample is easily soluble in given solvent such as water or any solvent, there is no question of treating the sample for further treatment in order to convert that into solution. Otherwise, we have to go for digestion. So digestion will be done by heating the sample with an acid or a base in an open container by using hot plate as a source of heat energy. Even we can dry ash the sample. This dry ashing will be done by placing the sample in a crucible such as quartz crucible or silica crucible, and this will be heated over a flame or in a furnace. During this dry ashing or digestion, oxidation of carbon to carbon dioxide, hydrogen to water, sulfur to sulfur dioxide and nitrogen to dinitrogen will be taking place. Right? So this dry ashing not only convert these materials to undergo oxidation such as carbon to carbon dioxide, hydrogen to water, sulfur to sulfur dioxide and nitrogen to dinitrogen. If we are interested to collect these gases, they can be trapped and we can weigh and we can determine their quantities in the organic material. Otherwise, we can leave them to expel. So during dry ashing, we can collect them if we require them. Otherwise, we can expel them to the atmosphere. And the other objective to subject the sample for dry ashing is, after ignition is over, if you ignite any sample, there will be residue will be left at the end, and this residue will be subjected further for analysis. So therefore, dry ashing will be done as one of the steps in decomposition. So if you go to conversion of solids into solutions, first step is the digestion step, and you have to take care about the loss of volatile matter during the digestion step. In the digestion step, all those heavy materials will be converted into simple materials by breaking the bond. If some strong functional groups are present during the digestion step, the bond breaking will be taken place in order to convert the molecules which are complex in nature to simple molecules. And in the decomposition step, we will dry ash the sample by igniting, by placing the sample in a crucible. By doing so, the species such as carbon, hydrogen, sulfur and nitrogen can be oxidized. If we are interested to determine their quantities, we can trap them and we can weigh them. So during this decomposition step, we will be ending up with a ash, with a powder which is inorganic residue, and this inorganic residue can be further subjected for analysis. What is the quantity of the analyte present? Because say for example, determination of sulfate in water sample, you will use barium to convert sulfate into barium sulfate. Then barium sulfate will be ignited. The white ash obtained at the end will be weighed, and that is proportional to amount of sulfate present in the sample. So that is the principle we will follow in the decomposition step. In the decomposition step, Even if you subject the sample for the decomposition step, inorganic samples will resist the decomposition by digestion even after treatment with acid or bases. Then what shall we do? In such cases, we have to mix the sample with fluxes. These fluxes are alkali metal salt, alkali metal salts. When you mix the sample with these alkali metal salts and if you heat them, the fusing up of this flux with the sample will be taken place in order to convert the sample into molten state. This resulted molten state sample will be easily soluble. After cooling, you can dissolve that in a suitable solvent under the room temperature. So this is also done. And moreover, this melts are nothing but they are composed by fusing the flux with the sample. Flux is nothing but any alkali metal salt. So this alkali metal salt, if it is decomposed with a sample, a state of the sample will be obtained, and that will be easily soluble in water or even dilute acid. So therefore, apart from digestion and decomposition, if the sample is known to impossible to convert that into solution state, we will go for treatment of the sample into with the fluxes. So fluxes are alkali metal salts. You can fuse these fluxes with the sample in order to convert them into soluble material. But there is a disadvantage while using the flux. We will be in a risk of contaminating the sample with large quantity of the flux and even the crucible, because while decomposition by igniting the sample, loss of volatile matter may be seen. So this is the disadvantage. So for every process you have to concentrate on tackling of disadvantage. So you should not lose the volatile matter if you are interested to determine the volatile matter. Otherwise there will be no any problem. You can subject the sample for decomposition. I can show you here some acids and bases which are used for sample digestion, because sample digestion step is the first step. If the sample is not soluble in any solvent, so we may have to go for the digestion step. 37% hydrochloric acid will be used to dissolve the metals, and which is more easily reduced than hydrogen because it has inert value of less than 0 volts. And this HCl will dissolve insoluble carbonates, sulfides, phosphates, fluorides, sulfates, and many oxides. So these are the analytes. These are the property of the analytes when they are treated with HCl during the digestion step. Similarly, HNO3, which can act as oxidizing agent and which will dissolve most common metals except aluminum and chromium. And even organics and biological samples will be decomposed in nitric acid. Even sulfuric acid will be used to dissolve metals and alloys for the decomposition of organics by oxidation and dehydration. Hydrogen fluoride 50% can also be used to dissolve the silicates in the form of SiF4, silicon tetrafluoride, perchloric acid, and aqua regia, which is a 3:1 mixture of hydrochloric acid and HNO3 you can use, and which will be used to dissolve gold and platinum, and sodium hydroxide to dissolve aluminum, and amphoteric oxides of tin, lead, zinc, and chromium. So these are some representative examples. Even more than this we can propose, and these are the acids and bases which can be used for digestion step for digesting the sample in order to convert the sample into solution state. Here is a table which is displaying the fluxes. I told you about the flux, and this flux will be treated with the sample in order to obtain a fused state of the sample, which will be easily soluble in water or in dilute acid when it is heated in a crucible to these particular temperatures. Say for example, we are intended to convert silicates, oxides, phosphates, and sulfides of any metals or any samples containing these group of compounds. You can treat them with sodium carbonate as a flux, and you can ignite, you can heat to a temperature around 851 degrees Celsius using a platinum crucible. So The flux sodium carbonate will give you a fused material of silicate or oxide or phosphate or sulfide, and that will be easily soluble in dilute HNO3 or dilute HCl or water. And lithium tetraborate can be heated to 930 degrees Celsius in platinum or graphite crucible for aluminosilicates and carbonates. These are the group of analytes which can be fused with lithium tetraborate or even lithium borate. So temperature is 845 degrees Celsius. Similarly, sodium hydroxide and potassium hydroxide at temperature 318 and 380 degrees Celsius. For gold and silver crucible, gold and silver, the analytes are silicates, silicon carbide, etc. And sodium peroxide you can use, and nickel crucible you have to use for decomposition of silicates, chromium which is present in the steel, and platinum alloys. So like this, many samples which are having this group of compounds can be subjected for ignition by using these type of crucibles up to temperature given here by using flux of sodium carbonate or lithium tetraborate or lithium borate, sodium hydroxide, potassium hydroxide, sodium peroxide, potassium persulfate, etc. So these are about some decomposition of inorganic samples with the fluxes. So this is about bringing the solid samples into solution form. Therefore, the implementation of the sampling plan is very important. Apart from the sample collection, apart from the analytical procedure has to be implemented for analysis, we should have idea about how to collect the sample, how to preserve the sample, and how to subject the sample which has been collected so that the components which are present in the sample must be maintained intact. Our aim is not to lose any component which is present in the sample. We have to maintain them all those intact, and we should not lose even one of them. So during the analysis, we must be in a position to report the quantities of each and every component. That's what. Apart from the following of the analytical procedure with a systematic and accurate way and precise way, following the sampling procedure is also important. It is as important as performing the experiment for analysis. So during the collection of the sample, you must be cautious. During the preservation of the sample, you must be cautious. And during the treatment of the sample, you must be cautious. So thank you very much for your patience. And this completes the implementation of the sampling plan for liquids, gases, and solids. Thank you very much.